Ahoj, chtěl bych vás přijít u hry Autopsy Simulator. Jestli jsem to dobře pochopil, tak se podíváme na to, jak probíhá taková pitva.
No, do not call me anymore. It's none of my business.
Tohle nepatří úplně k hrám, které vydáte na mém kanále, ale změnný je život. Okay, je to něco zajímavého.
It's only Thursday. Oh, the cops from Steven's visit yesterday. I don't think he likes my coffee. He barely took a sip.
Okay.
How am I supposed to record a lecture for the students now? Feeling completely broken. I'm gonna go nuts if I don't take my pills.
Okay, máme si zajít nějaký léky. Další člověk chybí.
It's for
Ztrácí
my
se
guests,
lidi, jo.
but they seem to never drink or say anything when they visit me.
Oho. Suška koně. Co je tohle nahoře? Zajímavá věc, tu neznám vůbec. Jsme vyhráli nějakou Alice. OK, televize.
Stephen. Since Alice died, Stephen is the only person I trust.
Zajímavé počmáraná teda. Tak to asi prohledávat nebudem, zkusíme jít prostě. Bathroom, OK, na záchodky.
Where are my meds?
A tady jsou pilulky nějaký. No, doufám, že to byly ty správné teda. OK. Zajímalo by mě teda, kde jsme.
All right. Now I can go get the camera.
Si představovat teda pitevnu úplně jinak.
Well, I hope I won't forget to press the record button this time.
OK. To zní jako, že už se mu to stalo. Barvy různé, takovýhle srandy, fajn. No, oni říkali, že, nebo psali, že se tu maluje. Tu autopsy, tohle je exit, takže jsem asi ne. Okay.
I'm wondering how the new tripod is going to work.
Dobrá. Tak kameru tady máme.
Properly and this should be fine.
Tak máme to
November
nastavené.
21st, 1991. Time 8:43 p.m. Recording for medical students from the University of Missouri. The autopsy is conducted by Jack Hammond. Ladies and gentlemen, it is always worth having a look at the files before conducting the autopsy. That is where we can find all kinds of clues to what could have potentially happened to the deceased.
OK. A se podívat teda na dokumenty. Našli jsme ho teda na benzínce, jo.
Parking lot near a gas station, where he often begged and insistently offered to clean the windows of cars that were leaving the station. The body was found in a dry field drain. A frequent cause of traumatic deaths among the elderly is the various types of accidents, including traffic accidents or falling down the stairs. The body was spotted by a station worker during the morning shift. At first, he thought that someone had thrown rain boots and a coat in a nearby ditch. It took him a moment to recognize a human body laying on its back. Signs of libation could be found around the dead body. Empty bottles, traces of an inept attempt to start a fire, and a scattered. The deceased is locally known as Old Toby. Homeless and unemployed for at least a couple years. He had gotten into fights and had been bullied by the problematic youth of the town. He was that type of a man who never kept off alcohol, which caused him to be homeless. As a young man working in a suburban coal mine most of his life, he already abused alcohol, and as the time went by, he'd fall into addiction more. That's interesting. Although alcohol poisoning is the sole cause of death among the elderly people is relatively rare, different levels of alcohol poisoning happen among 1 in 4 deaths of elderly people, which may suggest that alcohol abuse is a significant issue in this age group. What is important to note, even though alcohol poisoning does not cause death, it does increase the risk of accidents and their following injuries. The body was found at 7 o'clock by Sheriff Matthew Thompson. White male, 76 kilograms, 5'8", age unknown. The deceased is a local homeless man named Toby Chambers. His son runs a hardware store. His wife ran away years ago. Local police have talked to residents, so we know more about the deceased. For example, that he loved drinking, and by no means was abstinent. Such clues can direct us to things that are worth keeping in mind during the autopsy. Mention the rookie mistakes. Oh yeah, that's right. That's my warrant to sensify you for a few issues. First, due to the fact that in the process of revealing and securing forensic traces, interference that changes the primary condition happens. The photographic documentation plays a huge role in the entire process of examination. Then, the body needs to be placed on its back on the autopsy table. The pathomorphologist stands on the left-hand side of the body. Third, very rarely but still, the cause of death remains unknown if all the tests come out negative. That's the so-called white autopsy. Now remember that it can also happen.
OK.
The
Dobře.
deceased is locally known as Old Toby.
To už jsme
Homeless and
slyšeli
unemployed for at least
všechno.
a couple years. Found on the outskirts. The body mentioned found on the outskirts of a parking
To
lot near
vypadá, že máme všechno v tuto
where he
chvíli.
often begged and insistently offered to.
OK, so much information.
Oh,
V
what
tuhle
the
chvíli
damn
vůbec
gloves.
nevím, co... vůbec nevím, co všechno jsem si zapamatoval. Kde bych hledal brejle? Teda rukavice. Neviděl jste někdo rukavice? Kdyby byl rukavice, kam bych se schoval? A tady.
Now we can get to work. We're going to need the camera. It should be here somewhere.
No kameru už jsme tady dali, ne? Máme najít ještě nějakou jinou
Must have
kameru?
left it in one of the drawers.
To voice recorder, jasně, to máme na nahrávání hlasu. Mňamina? Ty jo.
They've been here for so long they even smell like they're dead. Maybe it's time to say goodbye.
Jakou kameru máme ještě hledat teda? Jako ruční nebo? Tady jinak je kamera, přece to stačí. OK, trvalo mi to docela dlouho, ale zdá se, že jsem teda našel foťák.
Let's follow the procedure and prepare photo documentation. We must follow the top-down rule. Luckily, we don't have to take pictures of the clothes this time. We are only focusing. Voila! Now we move on to the next step. Trace search. We're going to need better zoom here. And that's perfect.
OK. Máme tady nějaký poranění. Tak, co dál teda máme? Prsty jsou
People affected by
divný.
homelessness most often die from accidents, alcohol abuse, or they freeze to death. Unfortunately, both suicide and homicide are also quite common.
OK. Jinak na ruce nic nevidím. Tohle už jsme fotili, zkusím se podívat ještě z druhé strany. Má starou nějakou jizvu. Ale tady má modřinu na hlavě, se zdá. Taky modrý celý to má. Nohy už jsme teda fotili, tady jinak nic. Něco má s rukou? No, tady to vypadá jako, že byl svázaný.
Well, you don't have to stand close to be able to smell a strong odor of alcohol and other discharges. There's nothing left to say. Old Toby didn't spare himself.
OK.
While taking the photos, some entries that could be potentially lethal caught my attention. Let's take a closer look using the magnifying glass.
Tak, a co teď teda? Musím vzít jasně lupu. A se lupou podívat
There are
na
frostbite
tu
marks
ruku,
all
jo.
over the deceased's body. Although they are most visible on the tips of his fingers, they can be recognized by the very specific color of the skin. However, the hands tell us much more.
OK. Teď teda jsme zjistili co a ty hlavě.
That's something interesting. While making photographic documentation, ecchymosis can be seen on the deceased man's head. The appearance indicates the intravital nature of the wound. We'll come back later to see if everything is all right with the brain.
OK,
By the look
nožičku.
of his feet, I assume Toby must have worn uncomfortable and dinky shoes for quite a while. However, such wounds have nothing to do with his death.
Jasně. Ještě někde, jo, tady jsme
An old
koukali.
wound that hadn't healed properly. It must have been some kind of burn or other injury. Nevertheless, it has nothing to do with the potential cause of death. What do we have here?
OK, tady teda děláme zápis z toho ohledání. Determine the causes from the... No, mě by asi zajímalo toto, si říkám.
The condition of the head tells us it could have been a fatal accident.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Já mám teda asi všechno z toho označit teďko.
By the look of his feet, I assume Toby must have worn uncomfortable and dinky shoes for quite a while. However, such wounds have nothing to do with his death. It could be freezing to death. Yeah, the odor can be the result of alcohol intoxication. An old wound that hadn't healed properly. It must have been some kind of burn or other injury. Nevertheless, it has nothing to do with the potential cause of death.
OK, takže máme tady 3 možnosti, na co teda zemřel, jestli to chápu. Já bych se podíval teda... Tady to bude jednodušší, ne?
It does increase the risk of accidents and their following injuries. That's interesting. Frostbite in New Orleans. Actually, the weather this fall has been surprisingly nasty. A frequent cause of dramatic deaths among the elderly is the various types of accidents, including traffic accidents or falling down the stairs.
OK, to
At this
vypadá
point,
teda, že
that's all
tady
I can
teď
do
nic.
based on all traces on the body of the deceased. The inside should tell me much more. Let's move back to the body.
Takže máme se mu podívat na
Now
jeho
let's check the
pravou
level
ruku.
of muscle tension. This will allow us to establish time of death. Let's raise the deceased's hand.
OK, máme tady takovouhle minihru.
And then let go. The stronger the rigor mortis gets, the greater the resistance from the muscles will be. As you can see, the hand falls loose. The rigor mortis has already subsided. We can then assume that the time of death stated in the files is correct.
OK.
Let's grab a scalpel.
Máme si vzít skalpel a jdeme pitvat.
We can both look at the
Ježišmarja.
scalpel. It won't hurt him no more. We always start from the neck and move down towards the symphysis pubis. The incision should be deep. Next, we separate the skin and prepare to remove the ribs.
Jo, tady máme. Já jsem řešil, jak mám vzít tu ruku chvíli. OK. Super. Paráda.
The adipose tissue has an intense yellow hue. As you've probably already guessed, we're going to need the scissors.
Nevím, jestli jsem se do téhle hry chtěl teda pouštět, tak na to koukám.
After removing both cartilage and bone tissues, We are actually interested in two things that you can see at the very first glance. The lack of organ congestion means that, although the deceased was cold, hypothermia wasn't the cause of death.
Nevím, jestli jsem do tohohle chtěl teda jít, no. Ještě něco jsem neohledal. Tady, hele. Ne. Okay.
We can eliminate freezing as the cause of death.
Dobře, takže evidentně nezemřel zmizela mi myš. Máme vynda plíce, jo. Okay. Co s ním máme jako ohledat?
The deceased smoked like a chimney. Let's take a closer look. We see widespread black and tarry deposits caused by smoking cigarettes. Despite the tragic condition of the lungs, they are not the cause of death.
Jasně.
Now we need to go grab the syringe.
Proč já jsem do tohohle šel?
We need to test the level of blood alcohol concentration of the deceased. We move on to collecting blood from the heart. 5 milliliters from the left ventricle should do it.
Okay.
Now, we prick the bladder and draw about 10 milliliters of fluid.
S tím odebereme.
We also collect the fluid from the deceased to determine the level of alcohol concentration in the vitreous humor. Keep in mind that you have to set the right time and speed on both knobs before using the centrifuge. Our samples may break into pieces due to the centrifugal force if we set up the wrong coordinates. I myself am terrible with numbers because I suffer from dyscalculia, which is why I always keep the appropriate coordinates at hand.
Ok, takže odebrali jsme u tekutiny. Take the note from the pinboard. Ok. Tady bude napsáno, jak máme použít tu míchačku. 40 minut, 75%, ok. Nebo míchačku, no, ona to je vlastně asi jako centrifuga, že jo. 75. Start mixer. Ok, 40 minut. To je asi toto. 75 tam bylo, tohle 70. To bude 75, to bude 80, 80. Těžko říct. Asi takhle to zkusíme. What?
Damn it. If something goes to shit, it's on the way. That's probably the blown fuses again. Hold up. I must have had a flashlight somewhere.
A v tuhle chvíli odcházím od domu.
And I was hoping to clock out early today. What was that?
Kurv.
Where did it go?
Dobře.
Yeah, it's definitely the fuses. Right goes first, left next. Voila. Where's that unbearable noise coming from?
někdo to rádio jako zapnul.
Where were we? Oh yeah, no, right? Let's see what we've got here.
Ok, tohle se zdá, že co? Máme vyndat to.
Well, everything is telling us that the BAC, blood alcohol concentration, is high. Hence the smell we're getting from the deceased. Still, to be 100% sure, I have to send the samples to the lab. Unfortunately, I don't have the equipment to conduct a detailed analysis here.
OK. Ty ostatní máme jaký vyndat? Ne, máme se podívat na žaludek, jo. Jasně, to jsou ty fotky, co jsme dělali, OK. Tak.
Now let's take a closer look at the stomach.
Máme vyndat žaludek, jo. Paráda. Proč je takový tmavý?
The stomach has no major external damage. In this case, further inspection is no use. We must cut him open.
Máme ho otevřít, OK. Takže se podíváme, co měl v žaludku. Super, a tohle funguje jak? OK, už vidím tu minihru. Fajn, výborný. Teď by se znovu mohla ozvat ta kočka a ten žaludek skončí u sousedu. To vám rovnou povím.
That's interesting. In addition to a large amount of gas and liquid, the stomach also contains small amounts of yellow, grayish food content resembling some kind of meat. Either our deceased hadn't eaten in days, or some of the bulk of his stomach had found a way out.
Okay.
Now, it couldn't have been suffocation, could it? Now we need to focus on the cardiovascular system, especially the heart. We take the organ and look it up and down, carefully.
Okay. Takže srdíčko. Jdeme na něj. No. Takový zízven, tady jsou na ně vidět nějaký výrostky.
There are no pathological changes that have contributed to our Toby's death. Well, once we've got the body ticked off, we can move on to the head.
OK, podíváme se na hlavu, jo. Takže si máme vzít pilku. Ježiši.
Anyway, we will start dissecting the brain from the occipital lobe. In this way, the brain's dura mater is slowly revealing itself.
OK. Fajn. Tady nevypadá, že by byl nějak poškozený nebo něco. Nebo se mi to jenom zdá.
After the basic examination, we can see that the cerebral gyri in both brain hemispheres are symmetric and the bumps between them are clear. So far, so good. The hematoma seems to have had no effect on the organ we're examining. Holding a knife with a long, narrow blade in your dominant hand, cut the cranial nerves on both sides, pulling the brain towards you.
OK, budeme krájet mozek. What? Kolikrát to musíme přeříznout.
Just one small fragment examined under the magnifying glass is enough to dispel or confirm our doubts. We then take the fragment of the brain to the tray and, literally and figuratively, go over it with a fine-tooth comb.
Malej kousek mozku je tohle, jo. Super.
Just as I initially suspected, we can rule the fatal accident out as well.
Okay. máme vyndat, co tohle je, to je nějaká trávící trubice nebo něco takového, ne?
Same as we did with the stomach. Externally, while cutting a small organ,
Ok, jdeme opět řezat to.
To be able, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got it. Based on the report and preliminary documentation, it is safe to assume that the deceased passed out after consumption of alcohol and then fell asleep on his back. Then the gastric contents refluxed and flooded the airways, causing death. That's why we don't forget about the recovery position at dorm parties. And now it's all clear. The death was caused by suffocation. It went quite smoothly today. I'm about to get off.
Ok, takže máme hotovo. Teď to jenom zavřeme a můžeme jít domů. Šťastně za manželkou. Na večeři.
Back to its initial state, at least to a small extent, we must take the needle in our hand. We sewed the deceased using the baseball stitch technique. This stitching method is very strong and quick to do.
Ok, řekl bych, že v životě už jsem něco zašil, ale telefon, to bude zase v kanclu, že?
I'm coming. This is Dr. Jack Hanman. Please leave a message.
Good evening. How are you? How are you? How are you?
What the f is that supposed to be? I'll finish the stitching and I'm getting the fuck out of here.
Ty krás. Já tam jít nechci. Já myslím, že tohle stačí a dohráli jsme tuto hru právě, ne? Tady se co divnýho děje. Kde je to tělo?
What the fuck?
Myslím si, že to skončilo v ideální chvíli, protože jsem z té hry docela hotový. OK, tohle byla ukázka ze hry Autopsy Simulator. Já myslím si, že jako ukázka to velice stačí. Myslím si, že tuhle hru nebudeme hrát, až vyjde. Třeba mi napište, co si o takovýchhle hrách myslíte a doufám, že se spolu uvidíme u nějakého milejšího, pozitivnějšího videa, kde nebude tolik děsivých situací. Mějte se hezky.